everyone, and welcome back to Slice of Empathy podcast. In today's episode, we are speaking with Alan Lazaros, who is CEO, founder, co-host, and peak performance business coach with a powerful combination of technical expertise, business acumen, and he is a business coach, consultant, trainer, and speaker who specializes in helping businesses maximize their impact, growth, and profitability online. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. I'm really excited to learn more about your background in the corporate world and what made you leave that, especially because of so many struggles that I know folks go through in the corporate world. So I'm really curious to kind of learn more about you. So maybe if we could start off, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and maybe how you started your career in the corporate world and maybe what incentivized you to leave.
Okay, so the first thing I want to share is thank you so much for having me, Valerie. I've researched your show, I've researched the intro, the verbiage that you use about empathy and real life stories. I think most people only get past, statistically, I've done the research, they only get past 21 episodes. So thank you for having me. I do not take it lightly to speak into the lives of others and to have the opportunity. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As for my story, so I'm 35 years old. I'm going to be 36 in November. I often playfully joke, usually when we're on camera on podcasts, I usually playfully say I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36 because I look very, very young, which definitely helps me in business coaching now. But I'm trying to condense 35 years into just a few minutes here. And the first thing that I want to share with everyone is it's kind of like rewatching the movie that you loved when you were a kid. My girlfriend Emilia and I actually just rewatched Brother Bear. It came out in 2003 and I loved that movie when I was 14. And rewatching it again, literally last night, there's a lot of things I understand now that I didn't back then. There's layers that I didn't get. And so that's kind of a good analogy or metaphor, I think, for what I'm about to share with everyone, which is I now understand this narrative much more than I did in the beginning because I used to listen to podcasts 9 years ago and I used to think to myself, these people are so articulate. They have so much figured out. Why do I feel so lost in comparison? And now here I am 9 years later, sitting there going, wow, now I sound like that to other people, most likely. And the truth of the matter is the reason why is because I've spent the last 9 years coaching, speaking, podcasting, training, and writing. And when you do that for a living, particularly in the self-improvement space, you really start to understand yourself and your life and your past and your present and your future at such a deep level. And so if it comes off like I had it all figured out, trust me, I didn't. I only do in hindsight. Okay, so that said, my story begins definitely in adversity. My father, my birth father, passed away in a car accident when he was 28 years old. I was 2 years old at the time. My older sister was 6. My mom was 31. And I had a stepfather from age 3 to 14. So my real last name is actually McCorkle. My stepfather's last name is Lazaros. I took his last name around age 7. And at 14, I didn't know this at the time again, but it was definitely the hardest year of my life. Looking back, I've done a lot of therapy in my 30s and I've really started to understand this, even though at the time, again, I did not know. At 14, my stepfather left. So my dad, my birth father, John McCorkle, was from a big Irish Catholic family. So Jim, Joe, John, Jane, Joan, Jeanette. So my mom and papa, my grandfather and grandmother on my birth father's side had 6 children, Jim, Joe, John, Jane, Joan, Jeanette, and it was a big Irish Catholic family. When my father passed away and my stepdad came into the picture, we kind of didn't associate much with the McCorkles anymore because we were kind of trying to be the Lazaroses, so to speak. And my mom and stepdad did not get along, and that's a very, very public, medium, polite way to put it. So when I was 14, my stepdad leaves. And when he leaves, he not only takes 90% of the income with him, but he also takes his entire extended family with him. And I've not seen a single one of them since. And I have talked to him a little bit on Facebook Messenger, but not much. And that was a decade later, at least. Now, fast forward that same year when I'm 14 years old, and again, did not realize this until later on in my life, but that same year, my sister moved out with her older boyfriend. Understandable. And that same year, my mom got in a fight with her sister, my Aunt Sandy. And my Aunt Sandy kind of ostracized us from my mother's side of the family too. And so again, didn't know this at the time, because I was just going through it, growing through it, don't understand any different. But by the time I'm 14 years old, I kind of lost 3 families. And so talk about abandonment issue stuff.
Yeah.
And so I did the only thing I knew how to do. And the 4 trauma responses, if you study the psychology, is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. The 4th one's the one I didn't know about until my 30s. And ironically, that's the one that
that one, actually.
Okay, so fight, flight, and freeze. Fawn is appease. It's don't poke the bear. It's whatever you want, whatever you need. Like, yeah. So anyone who had an overly dominant, aggressive, deeply insecure caregiver usually fawns just to try to appease to make sure they're good. And picture this. The best way to describe it is, have you ever been around someone who, as long as they're good, everyone's good?
Yeah.
But the moment they're not good, they make it a living hell for everyone around them, type of thing. That's what that is. And so anyways, so my trauma response when it came to social situations was fawn. But when it came to me being behind the scenes by myself, I had a different trauma response. My trauma response was fight. And it was fight to work harder, aim higher, get smarter. Work harder, aim higher, get smarter. Work harder, aim higher, get smarter. And so what I did was, and again, I didn't understand what was happening to me back then, but I just bootstrapped my way and I got straight A's through all of high school. I was going for what's called the President's Award. I have an award behind me signed by George W. Bush. And it's essentially saying you got a 95 or above grade point average for all 4 years, all 4 report cards per year. So 16 report cards straight. I remember I got 189 in honors English. And luckily it was weighted because it was an honors class. But that was the last time I took honors English. Anyways, so I went to a tech school. My dream was to be an engineer. And I went to one of the most expensive tech schools, which I needed scholarships and financial aid for. That's actually why I bootstrapped through high school, because once my stepfather left, before that, we were very well off. Late 90s, early 2000s, economy booming, .com bubble type stuff. He worked for a company called Agfa, which did hospital computers. And so we had yacht boats and snowmobiles and motorcycles and BMWs and that kind of thing. And we lived on a small lake. And then when he left, he got the yacht and the apartment building. We got the house and the dog. And I went from Xbox, Dreamcast, vacations, ski trips, boats, and all that to basically I get free lunch at school now because our income is so low. And I now shop at Salvation Army for my clothing. Now, again, we weren't going to starve, but we were definitely not wealthy by any means of any stretch of the imagination. So I went from quite the roller coaster. So my life was a roller coaster for sure. So I just bootstrapped. How am I going to go to a $50,000 per year school called WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute? And this is back then, if I don't have the money. So I need scholarships and financial aid. So I just bootstrapped straight A's, math and science type of guy. And then I got in and I got financial aid and I went to get my computer engineering degree. And then I went from computer engineering, which was brutal, by the way, to master's in business, MBA, master's in business administration. And then I job hopped a bunch through that, internships, and I worked for a bunch of different tech companies. I worked for iRobot. I worked for Sensata Technologies. I worked for a company called Oz Development. I worked for Tyco Safety Products. I worked for a company called Lens Americas. Internships, jobs, that kind of thing. And so after my master's, I eventually ended up in a company called Cognex. And the company called Cognex sells industrial automation equipment into manufacturing facilities all across the world. They do machine vision equipment. So essentially the eyes of robotics. And that's a really simple way to put it, but imagine water bottles going down a line or ice cream containers going down a line, and images are being taken at 100 per minute, and they're checking the quality assurance to make sure the cap is on and the logo is right and that kind of thing. And so I did an inside sales engineering team there, and then I did an outside sales engineering team. I didn't do it, but I was an outside sales engineer, and I managed Connecticut, Western Massachusetts, and Vermont. And so I was on the road selling industrial automation equipment into manufacturing facilities. That's when I got in my car accident. So I'm in my early 20s. I achieved what I thought mattered, which is money. I went from 65 to 85, from 85 to 105, from 105 to 125, and then 125 to nearly $180,000 at the tail end of my corporate career. And so I went from broke, getting free lunch in high school because our income was so low after my stepdad left, to basically a 1% global earner. And I say earner, not net worth. And I also say global because in the US, the top is, I think, like 450 or something like that for the top 1%. But at the end of the day, I had more than enough money. I had a beautiful girlfriend, but I didn't have a family. I didn't have a home. I bought a $5,000 Volkswagen Passat to save money. I paid off $84,000 worth of college debt in a single year. And I had $150,000 in a Vanguard account, which was just an investment portfolio of technology stocks. And I was the techie, partier guy who did really well as a computer engineer with an MBA combination. And I was super successful, but I was deeply unfulfilled. Then I got in my own car accident and I was up in New Hampshire with my little cousin. We were playing Call of Duty. We were headed to TGI Fridays. I was looking down at the GPS. This was the dark winter back in 2015 that had snowbanks covering the signs up in New Hampshire. There's a lot of snow in the winter. And there was a yield sign I was supposed to yield and I didn't. I end up on the wrong side of the road. And I look up from the GPS and I see what I thought was a Mack truck in front of me, right in front of me, 10 feet away. And biggest, brightest lights I'd ever seen. And I calculated in my brain in that moment, there's no possibility that this is not the end. That there's no way we survived this. Fortunately, like I said, I was driving the 2004 Volkswagen Passat. Thank you, Volkswagen, for saving my life. I bought this car in cash and I used to call it the tank. This was a German engineered steel trap of a car. And this thing just took it like a champion. And also, it was not a Mack truck. It was a lift kitted pickup truck. If it had been a Mack truck, I think we would not be here, my cousin and I. So airbags did deploy. He hurt his knee on the airbag. I hurt my face on the airbag. And physically, we were okay. I mean, I show pictures in my speeches. This car is absolutely totaled. I mean, the whole entire hood is completely smashed in. But again, very safe car. Now, here's the thing. So physically, I'm okay. But I've seen pictures of my dad's car. I've heard stories about my dad, John, my whole life. And he died in a car accident when he was 28. And my pictures of my car don't look very different. And so while physically I was okay, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was completely and utterly Phoenix burned down existential quarter life crisis. And so I had some PTSD. I had double yellow lines scared me. I kept getting pulled over because I was too far on my side of the road. It was really hard for me to overcome a lot of that. I got claustrophobic for a time. I really had some hard times after that. But the part that I think is really important is I was awakened to personal growth. I now understand that prior to 26 years old, I was achievement oriented and I was professionally developed and I was intelligent and I was hardworking and I was improvement oriented, but I wasn't self-improvement oriented. So I could improve my business. I can improve my craft in snowboarding or basketball or video games. I can improve persons, places, things, and ideas, but I wasn't self-improvement oriented. I wasn't focused on self. And now I realize that I flipped the script since then. So I was successful and deeply unfulfilled prior to 26. And now I'm very grateful to say that I'm very successful and fulfilled. But I got to tell you, I went all the way past broke. I liquidated all my assets. I started my own company. This was 9 years ago. And over the last 9 years, I went all the way past broke and I was super fulfilled starting my own company, but I was unsuccessful. And so I've been successful and unfulfilled, which sucks. I've also been fulfilled and unsuccessful, which it turns out also sucks. And now I'm very grateful 9 years later to say I'm successful and fulfilled, and I want my life to be an amplified version of what it already is. So that's a really long-winded story, but I'm trying to condense 35 years into 10 minutes. I do think that context is really important. So the lesson in it, I think, is try your best to have your existential quarter life crisis early or your midlife crisis early. Try to face those big mirrors and those big regrets in advance, because honestly, if you're on autopilot like I was, you're in some serious trouble.
Absolutely. And I love that you shared that with us and kind of thinking about it, especially when we think about being successful and being unfulfilled. A lot of folks correlate the two, and going down that journey of your path to finding that balance of being successful and fulfilled. How would you maybe suggest or maybe advise someone who's maybe trying to navigate that path and find that balance?
So that's actually what I do now for a living, which I'm so grateful for, which is I'm a business coach, but for the last 7 years, I've been coaching. I started for free and then my prices rose as demand increased. which I'm very grateful now. I have 26 people on my roster. My youngest is 18. My oldest is 63, all different countries, all different industries. I have this 10,000 hour tracker. I'm a big numbers guy as a computer engineer. And really what that means is I've learned so much about different walks of life from all over the world now. It's really cool to peer into the behind the scenes. And so that's what I do now for a living is I help people be successful and fulfilled. But I had a bunch of different modalities of coaching. So I started out as a fitness coach, and then I was a life coach kind of for a short time. Then I was a mindset coach. Then I was a peak performance coach for a while there. And then I was eventually a business consultant. And then I eventually rebranded to business coaching. But ultimately, through that whole journey, business is kind of the flavor of ice cream that I'm selling, for lack of better phrasing. But ultimately, what we end up doing is the people that come to me are in one of three buckets. And I think your listeners will identify with one of these three. So the first bucket is someone who is like what I was, which is you're successful and deeply unfulfilled, meaning you're doing really well financially. You have a hell of a career and you're working really hard, but it's not meaningful to you. And so you're not super, it's not your passion. It's not your purpose. You're not even sure what your passion or purpose is maybe, but you're very successful and it does make good money typically. That's bucket one. That's where I was prior to my car accident. And so in that bucket, the person has potentially a business, but the business is not their passion or their purpose. And so they're unfulfilled. And so the business is not aligned with who they are anymore. That's bucket one. Bucket two is what I was after my car accident, which is someone who is deeply fulfilled, but really not successful. I just didn't make enough money to sustain what I was doing, but I loved what I did. And that doesn't mean I wanted to do it every day. But I always say, you don't know you love something because you always want to do it. You know you love something because you're always glad you did. And so you might not always want to show up to that coaching call or that podcast or whatever it is, but you know you love something when you're always glad you did. And that's I think a little golden nugget. But the second bucket is people who are fulfilled and aligned in who they are, but not very successful. And I think a lot of people fall in that bucket. The first two buckets, I would say, is at least 90% of the population. You're either successful and unfulfilled like I was, or you're super fulfilled, but not really crushing it in your career or your business. Third bucket is the bucket I want everyone to aspire to. This is what I work on helping everyone get to. So the third type of client that comes to me is someone who, I have one client, her name is Yvette. Amazing. And so she said, Alan, I'm already successful. I love my life. I'm super aligned. And she's super well developed too. I mean, it makes sense. And she said, I just want an amplified version of what my life already is, but I don't want to do it working 12 hours a day like you. And I said, okay, sounds good. So we're going to find a way to grow in scale and work smart and hard, but not harder. And so that one's a little more challenging for me because I'm someone who definitely does not, I put it all out on the court and I definitely don't believe in the 4-hour work week thing or any of that. But at the end of the day, she's already 16 years into doing this craft. She's 9 years into her business. She's already very successful. And I just have to help her track a few things that are going to help her really amplify. So those are the three buckets. The first one is what I call the unfulfilled success. That was me prior to my car accident. The second bucket is the fulfilled unsuccessful. And then the third bucket is the successfully fulfilled. And that third bucket is what I think all of us are looking for, but it's very difficult because unfortunately, most of the things that we adore in life are not super profitable. Most of the things that are profitable are the things that suck. And that makes sense, right? If you're going to automate or delegate something, it's going to be the things that suck. Yeah. But the cool part that you have to realize is that there's something that you are uniquely gifted at. There's something that fulfills you. And there's something that makes good money. And that's a little Venn diagram for everybody. I'm writing a blog on it right now. The first circle is what fulfills you. Start there. Write out a list of everything that fulfills you. The second circle is what you're really good at. If you could line up 9 other people in a room and there's a room of 10 random people and you're one of them, what are you the best at? And then the third one is what makes good money. And I often joke, I say, how much money would Michael Jordan have made to play basketball 100 years ago? And the answer is $0. There was no NBA and there was no market for basketball back then. And so no matter how good you are at it, there's no market. Just like for esports and video games. Now video gamers make a ton of money, but back in the day, there was no online multiplayer games. So you couldn't do that, right? So a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have the trifecta in life, which I think is health, wealth, and love. And the reason why is because it's very hard to be holistic. And usually people are successful and unfulfilled, or fulfilled and unsuccessful. And my job is to help them learn how to design a life as my engineering brain works on their life that is aligned with both.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned that also because I'm thinking about a lot of folks who I know, especially in the corporate world, where identities are very much tied to what I won't say the 9 to 5, but not what we call like the 5 to 9. And I think for me, especially like working on this podcast, I'm a work in progress myself. And I think honestly, I was laid off a couple months back in my last position, and they were performing reductions throughout the company. And I had been with the organization for 8 years. And even though part of me, I want to say, was really burned out, probably for at least half that time, for 3 to 4 years. And it was almost soul crushing, even though I knew it was just the company had to reduce staff for financial reasons. I was just all of a sudden like thrown out, and I'm like, what? Like I spent so much time trying to find that balance between like that, I guess that work life balance and the other things that I really love doing. But then I hadn't realized how much of my identity I had let tied to that particular place of employment in those 8 years. I hadn't realized how, I guess, in a way I was enmeshed. And so all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, who am I now? Like outside of this role and outside of this company. And it's been a couple months now, and I've since found another position. But right now, until I start my new position, I am working and I'm teaching part time in the evenings and I'm taking some freelance work. It took me at least a good few weeks to really feel okay about what happened, I think. And initially, it was a lot of bitterness, a lot of frustration, worry, of course, about finances and things like that. But I think now it's almost empowering in a way because I feel like it's an opportunity for me to kind of take my life back. And I know a lot of people, especially who are in tech, faced a lot of layoffs this year. And so I know the market is really tough for a lot of people. But I think for me, I've really found a lot of empowerment into using this time to kind of reevaluate what's really important to me and what I really want to do. And kind of thinking back to if that layoff didn't happen, I'd probably kind of still be stuck, feeling stuck in this job and just kind of doing the same thing the day to day. But okay, it's a steady paycheck, da da da. And at the time, I thought that's okay. Well, this job seems stable, this and that. And until it wasn't, because I mean, unless you have like a job with the state or a government position, our job can be gone tomorrow. And I think for me, it was really eye opening. I mean, initially, the first couple of weeks, I was just so frustrated. How did this happen? All of this, I think for me at this point in time now, I'm like, it's actually kind of nice to be able to kind of take back that time and rediscover myself. What do I want kind of going forward? What do I want next? And I think had that not happened, I'd kind of still be in that perpetual state of, okay, I'm just going to stick out this job because it's a steady paycheck and I have to, or whatever reasons that we have, because I was there for so long. So I felt like even though I had kind of stagnated in my career, I felt like, okay, well, because of the stability, I need to kind of stick with this. But now I kind of, as I've gotten out of that, I kind of think, I'm like, okay, there are so many other possibilities that I can reconcile. And it's always empowering in a way to realize there are so many other modalities and streams of income I can also look into. And so that's been, aside from having like kind of a nice break, that's been really beneficial for me and empowering in a way. And I know you're thinking about talking about the different types of buckets, and it's interesting. And I'm curious because I have had folks tell me that, well, I'm not good at anything. How might you advise someone who might be starting off, maybe in that state of mind where they're like, I don't feel like I'm good at anything? How might you advise someone who might be in that position?
Well, the first thing, and I appreciate you sharing all that too. And it sounds to me like you started in bucket one, like I did, and then you're headed to bucket two, and then eventually three. So good for you. And it's not what happens to you, right? It's what you do about it. And that doesn't take away from bad things do happen to us. And at the end of the day, the only thing in our control, in my opinion, is what you say, think, do, feel, and believe. And the way you react in negative situations, I think, is going to dictate a lot of putting yourself into position to have a bigger, better, brighter future. But when it comes to the question that you asked of people who say, I'm not really good at anything, the first thing I would do is just challenge that belief. I think that's probably crap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, 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 very unlikely. It's almost impossible to not be good at anything. And the problem with gifts, and same with me, I have a business partner, his name's Kevin, and he says, if you're wrong about one thing, you're wrong about everything. And I agree with him. And what he means by that is I never knew what it was like not to have high self-belief. And so I would coach people and I didn't realize how much self-doubt they have because they're mirroring me. And so a lot of people, I never used to have the courage to share things like this because I don't think I had a lot of confidence in who I was. I had a ton of confidence externally, like apply to the job, do the thing, blah, 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 blah. Like competence, courage I had in spades, but social courage, not so much. So I was always very scared to be disliked. And by the time I realized that was actually making me more disliked rather than just being vulnerable and honest, I kind of learned how to overcome that in therapy and this, that, and the other thing. But so I never used to say this, but for example, if you're wrong about one thing, you're wrong about everything. Meaning if you think you're not good at anything, you're most likely wrong about that. And let's think rationally instead of emotionally. And I'm a computer engineer, so forgive me for that. But for me, I'm hyper rational. So I went through my whole childhood and young adult, early 20s, thinking everyone was irrational and lazy. And the truth is they're not. I'm just really hardworking and super, super numbers rational. So I'm hyper rational and really, really hardworking. And so I had no idea that I was that way though. And I had no idea that other people weren't. I just didn't understand why other people, they would say they want these goals and then they just wouldn't do anything about it. It just never made any sense to me. And then I dug into psychology. I dug into neuroscience. I dug into personal development and self-improvement. I dug into personal growth and inner work and the modalities of therapy. And I realized most people just don't have what's referred to in psychology as self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, there's two types. One of them is external and one of them is internal. And self-efficacy basically is self-belief. Do you believe in yourself? Do you believe you can transform? Because people would always ask me, like, how did you get through all that? You didn't have a father. Your father died when you were 2. Your stepdad left at 14. You lost 3 families by the time you're 14. I don't understand. How did you become this? And I said, I had 2 huge advantages in life. And honestly, Valerie, I never used to have the courage to say this either, but not much more than 2. That's been a little interesting for me to research and realize, like, statistically speaking, I had some serious, it's called an ACE score, adverse childhood experiences. And while there was some good things in my childhood, I have a very, very high ACE score, adverse childhood experiences. There was 2 advantages that I had. Number 1, I was born in a free country that invests in powerful minds. So there, back in the day, back when I was in middle school and high school, there was something called equal opportunity. And I was able to get scholarships and financial aid. And so I was able to go to one of the best tech schools in the world, one of the best technical colleges on the planet, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, because I was able to work really hard to get scholarships and financial aid. And I would not have been able to go if it wasn't for my country investing in me. So that's number 1. I'm very grateful. Number 2 advantage is I have a really, really, really powerful brain. And I don't know what it's like not to. And my point of all this isn't to talk about me. It's to answer your question, which is I didn't know that I had level 10 self-belief. I didn't know that I could reverse engineer finish lines in advance. I didn't know that I was super hardworking and super rational. I didn't know that math and science always came easy to me and that I was able to calculate things other people can't. And now that I understand that, I now have more empathy, to the point of your show, for people who don't. And so you are good at things. You just don't know it because you've always been that way.
Exactly.
One more simple example. I have a really good memory. That's another one. Emilia always says, my beautiful girlfriend, she says, math and memory. Math and memory. I think in numbers, there's 4 modalities of thinking. One of them is numbers. It's the rarest. That's why us engineers have low self-worth and don't get along with people. The other one is words. So if you're out there listening, these are the 4. You think in numbers, or you think in words and concepts, or you think in images and pictures, or you think in energy. So Valerie, I would say for you, it's probably, based on your conversation with me thus far, most likely it's energy first, Number 2 would be words and concepts. Number 3 would be images and pictures. And I think number 4 would probably be numbers. I could be wrong about that, but that's my
spot on, to be quite honest, because honestly, it's always a running joke between my husband and I, but I am terrible with math. So you're spot on.
Okay, so here's the cool part. You are strong where I am weak, and I am strong where you are weak. And so now if we can learn how to collaborate and cooperate, we can do big things where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so you're an emotionally driven person who has tons of empathy and has probably been self-reflecting since she was a young girl and writing in her diary. I already know that. I didn't write in my diary. I didn't even have a journal until I was 26, right? So I was this ridiculously intelligent, competent, professionally developed robot who had never looked inside. And obviously I'm being playful, like obviously not never, but at the end of the day, we're supposed to learn how to collaborate and cooperate and appreciate each other so that we can grow. And so if you're out there and you think you're not good at anything, it's not true. You just have to look at what comes naturally to you that you maybe undervalue because it's always been there.
Absolutely. And I definitely think it takes a level of self-awareness to really, I guess in a way, be kind of one with yourself and really know yourself in a way. And sometimes it takes someone such a long time to really discover these things. And I love the way you put it was very beautifully worded, especially because when we kind of think about when we work together and picking up in some places where one of us might lag or be more proficient in than the other, there are definitely different ways that when we come together collaboratively that we can put our strengths together to kind of outweigh the other's weaknesses. And so it's definitely a lot of food for thought. And I'm kind of giving that some thought. And I love that you described it that way, because I definitely think that it highlights how we all complement each other in some way, shape, or form. And we all have our strengths and weaknesses. So I love that you said that.
And the other thing that I would add to that too, that's just so cool, and thank you, is that every strength comes with a weakness. So for me, self-confidence, self-belief is a huge strength, but it comes with a huge weakness. And one of them is inability to empathize. I am not naturally as humble, right? I don't doubt myself often, so I'm reckless. So every strength comes with a weakness. The problem is we're envying everyone else's strengths, and overlooking the weakness that comes with it. And then we're focusing on our own weakness instead of the strength that comes with it. So if you have a weakness for self-belief, you're obviously very humble. So you're probably a natural student who is often learning, like trying to learn. So you probably are more curious and more open, and you probably take better notes and study more than I did when I was arrogant and just partying all night, getting straight A's in calculus. So it's important to be well-rounded as a human being, but that doesn't happen when we're in an echo chamber, and it doesn't happen when we're insecure and we don't handle and face our own traumas. And so we all have strengths and weaknesses. I always say you got to make sure your yin is yanging. So you mentioned you and your husband. He most likely is a numbers thinker. So he most likely helps more with the long-term strategic finances. That's okay. It's a good thing. You're supposed to complete each other. You're not supposed to be the same. But we think, well, we're supposed to be best friends and we're supposed to be the same and we're supposed to, no. I have a podcast with my girlfriend, future wife. Whenever I say future wife, everyone says congratulations. So they're assuming we're engaged. I just mean we're very visionary. So future wife. But at the end of the day, we have a podcast called the Conscious Couples Podcast. And so we've been coaching couples for 3.5 years now. And so we've gotten not only insights into individuals, she's a coach as well, but couples too. And what you find is that great relationships are not built on being similar. They're actually built on similar core values, similar core beliefs, and similar core aspirations. But different skill sets, complementary skill sets, complementary strengths and weaknesses. And so this idea that you're supposed to be similar to your friends or to your partner, I always say, make sure your yin is yanging. It's yin and yang, not yin and yin. It's not yang and yang. And I think that that's a really important piece of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Because if we were all the same as me, not only would the world be wildly boring, but it wouldn't be what it could be in terms of the arts and the creatives and all these different things. Like I'm a numbers through and through utilitarian. So I'll make sure we're on the rails. I'll make sure the numbers are dialed in and we have structure. And it bothers me when my co-host, Kevin, has a background that's sometimes purple, sometimes red, sometimes blue. And it's like, dude, can we just go with our brand? And he's like, dude, stop trying to stifle my creativity. Right. So we have yes, we need to brand, and it's blue and white, but we also need to let him fly with his creative freak flag fly, so to speak. And so I think all of us need to learn how to understand where we fit and where we should be the leader, and then where we should be a student, where we should let other people lead. And I call it co-pilot pilot. Emilia pilots when it comes to inner work. She's had a therapist since she was 12. She's been studying the different modalities of therapy her entire life. She understands psychology deeper than anyone I've ever met. But I'm going to lead when it comes to tech, when it comes to which Wi-Fi we're going to get, when it comes, because I was building computers when I was in my early teens. So you just got to know where you're good. You got to know where you're not. You got to have the security within yourself and who you are to actually own that. And if you do, you're going to have an unbelievable relationship, but not only relationship, but also life, because now you can actually collaborate in a way that's meaningful.
So true. And I really love that perspective, because I often hear, and sometimes it can almost come across as cliche, but like, I know like they use the term like say opposites attract, but I really do feel like there's a lot of truth in that, and finding out, like you were saying, the yin and yang. And it's so true, because my husband's kind of the more logical one. I'm the more like creative one. And I think that makes us work really well together. And it's interesting, a lot of people feel like, oh, okay, well, we have to be like the same things and have the same interests. And I think there's a lot to be said that we kind of, in a way, tend to attract an opposite. And I think it's like complementary, really, in a way. And I'm really curious to learn more about your couples podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the Conscious Couples podcast, it's essentially, we playfully call it the love train. And what we mean by that is so we've got 102 episodes now, I think. We do one a week. It's Emilia and I. And she has her own podcast called Evolve Ventures Technology. I have my own podcast called Next Level University. And we have those two businesses. So she's the CEO of Evolve Ventures Technology. I'm the CEO of Next Level University. And then we have a podcast together. And I guess I'm the CEO of the we, is what we call it. So there's the two me's and the we. And the logo for the company is actually a pyramid, which I think is really cool, because a picture a pyramid with pyramids within it. And so there's two pyramids that represent the me. So the two me's then create the we. And if you picture a pyramid that's broken down into a diamond and two pyramids, hopefully everyone can picture that. I'm not very great at articulating images because I don't think in images. But anyways, so imagine that, and then a true North Star at the top of it. So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that's really the idea, is you can build a bigger, better, brighter future by having a better and more magnificent relationship. And if you're going to have a more magnificent relationship, the grass is greener where you water it. So you have to work on these relational skills that our school system just so neglected. I actually think they did a good job with math, science, and writing and reading. I do. I think they did a good job with that. But honestly, when it comes to personal growth, personal development, empathy, communication skills, trust, vulnerability, humility, courage, these things they just did not teach. And that's facts. And I just think that was a massive neglect that is really hurting people, because people think, well, I'm going to get married and it's all going to work. And that is so unreasonably far from the truth. You have to learn how to handle conflict healthfully. You have to learn how to build trust. You have to learn how to be honest with yourself and others. You have to learn how to communicate effectively. And these things are skills. They're skills that you have to work on. And the irony is, if you're afraid to lose, you're never going to win, because you're going to be constantly tiptoeing around any actual, real, courageous, vulnerable conversations. And so that's what the podcast is about. It's a safe space and a community of what we call conscious couples and singles, where we're intentionally working on these things so that our relationships do flourish.
I appreciate you mentioning that, because anything relationships, marriage, family relationships is definitely my bread and butter. So I'll definitely be checking out that podcast. And the episode hasn't gone live yet, but my husband and I actually had recorded an episode. It was kind of for fun. It was playing this game called We're Not Really Strangers. And this is for couples. They have a few different editions. They have one for family, friendships, I think like one for coworkers. So I really love exploring those topics. And especially when we kind of think about relationships, a lot of times I feel like when we're younger, we're sold the idea as if like the perfect person is going to come along and solve all of our problems and we're going to work perfectly together. If there's any conflict, then they're probably not the right person. There's all these red flags. And I feel like a lot of folks like kind of sell you this story as it's very black and white, where it's really not. There's a lot of gray areas. And as you're mentioning, it really takes a lot of conscious effort, a lot of communications. And I think that's partially one of the reasons I started the podcast, is to kind of delve into these topics at further level and detail. And because I think on some level, we all go through so many different challenges, whether it's in our relationships or professional life, that we have to recognize the two. And it's not like, okay, you get married and happily ever after, we get sold the story. And it's the same thing. I feel like when we have kids too, like it's very, I want to say, romanticized. And we're like, no, there is a lot of challenges, but not to say that there isn't some beauty in that, but we want to acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges and it does take a lot of conscious effort to make those things work.
Yeah, the belief, and I do got to jump, unfortunately, but I really appreciate this first and foremost. Thank you so much. But the last thing I would leave everyone with is this, which is, to your point, if you believe you're going to create anything of real meaning and value without conscious effort, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Conscious effort is the only thing that builds real value. And until you wake up and realize that, you're like me before my car accident, just hoping for results that are meaningful, when in reality, I was on autopilot and I wasn't oriented around meaning. I was more oriented around achievement at the expense of meaning and fulfillment. And so I really flipped that script after 26, and I'm grateful that I did. And it sounds like you already are, and you're going through your own transformation. So I really appreciate you having me, Valerie. I really do. And thank you. I hope you do check out the podcast. I think you will enjoy it for sure. A lot of couples are really enjoying it. And we have this one thing called the 25 conscious love languages that I can send you. And it's our highest hitting digital asset. We have a bunch of digital assets between the two companies. And it's basically, there's 2 columns. So there's 25 conscious love languages. Most people know of Gary Chapman's 5, and it has those 5. And then there's 20 more. And what we've found with all the couples we've coached over the last 3.5 years is that every single couple has a couple of them that they're just absolutely missing each other. So each partner rates the importance of each love language from 0 to 10. And then you realize, ooh, I have a 10 where you have a 2. And we've just been so missing each other for years. And that's where most of the cheat codes are, is just understanding, oh, got it. So health and fitness is only a 4 for you and it's a 12 for me. Again, I'm being exaggerating. So it's a 10 for me. That's what we call a 6 delta, which is just not good, because you're going to basically tell yourself a story. Oh, maybe one day she'll come to the gym with me, or maybe one day he'll work out with me. When in reality, you have to own it and then consciously put effort where that's not natural. There's areas for each couple that just aren't natural. So for example, your fun, unique experiences, I can tell by your background, creating and articulating and planning fun, unique experiences is not a natural strength of a type A achiever who is very dialed in, logical, and rational, like potentially your husband. So you spending your whole life wanting him to be something different than he is ironically actually keeping it from flourishing. But that doesn't change the fact that he could put more conscious effort, right? So at the end of the day, hopefully that's helpful. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure, Alan. Before we hop off, would you be able to share with our listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about what you do and all of your podcasts and where they can connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. So the main podcast is Next Level University, and it's holistic self-improvement in your pocket from anywhere on the planet, completely free every single day, 1% improvement over time. And we do an episode every day, so it's always there for you. That's the best place to find most of what I do. That's like the one river that leads to all rivers, so to speak. But we also have a website called nextleveluniverse.com. So the podcast is Next Level University, and the website is Next Level Universe, which incorporates all things Next Level. We have a meetup, we have a book club, we've got a journal called the Dreamliner, we've got a bunch of stuff. So reach out, and you can also email me, alan@nextleveluniverse.com. Just please provide context, because like all of us, I get a bunch of spam and I don't need more of that.
Absolutely. And I'm definitely curious about learning more about those 25 different love languages. So I'll definitely look out for that as well.
Valerie, email me. I will send it right on over to you. Totally. And you and your partner, I'm telling you, there'll be a breakthrough in there for you. I promise.
Perfect. I'll absolutely do that.